Welcome to Just Break Up, the podcast about love, heartbreak, and all the relationship advice you don't want to hear. My name is Sierra DeMulder.
And I'm Sam Blackwell. And today we're going to answer a letter from somebody who wants to set a boundary, but not an ultimatum. But before we begin, we just want to give you our Surgeon General's warning, which is that Sierra and I are not licensed mental health practitioners.
No, we definitely are not. We are not professionals. We are not trained in this. Honestly, this is our second take doing the intro because I forgot my name. So please. I forgot my own damn name in the script that we've been reading for the last almost 5 years, y'all. We're coming up on 5 years in July of 2023. All right. So anyway, this is all to say, please don't trust Sam and I. Take our advice as you see fit. We are only here to offer our humble musings to hopefully shed some understanding and maybe some laughs about the incredibly rewarding, but mostly confusing experience that is love. All right. Our check-in topic is actually from a letter writer. The letter writer's name is Just Let It Fizzle Out, whose pronouns are she, her, who's writing to us from Canada. And they write, hello, I think this would be more of a check-in topic. I tend to hold a seemingly unpopular opinion that is, after a first date, you don't owe the person an explanation of why you don't want to go out again. Others I chat with seem to think you need to send a, quote, breakup text indicating you aren't interested. So, to text or not to text? That is the question.
Yeah, this is a great question. And I feel like it's going to be really divisive for lots of our listeners. I feel like we're definitely going to.
Well, the caveat here is that everybody has a different opinion on this. And there's no, you might believe in your soul that there's a right way to do this or a wrong way to do this. And it just might be 100% different from the person sitting next to you.
For sure.
And fun fact, Sam and I don't actually know our opinions, each other's opinions
on this. We didn't share with each other.
We're going in blind on this one. So Sam, tell me, where do you fall on this?
I fall on the it's fine to just let it fizzle out side
Even
of
though
the
so
fence.
many people write us and I was ghosted, everything went so well, and then I didn't hear from them, and my heart was crushed.
After one date?
Literally, probably 45%
of
our letter
listeners
writers
are screaming at me right now and being like, I was deeply hurt by a person who went on a date with me.
Your ego was really.
Here's the thing is first dates, I don't count to me. They are they are so.
You know what you're revealing to me? Not your opinion about texting or not texting, but your sociopathy. Sociopathy. There we go.
Sociopathy, I think is the word you're trying to say.
No way. No way is that pronounced that way. Just kidding. No. Just kidding. Because
my thing was always get off the apps as quickly as possible. Don't have a 20-minute or a 20,000 day conversation where we're just and you don't actually know this person and they're sending you cute little memes or whatever. It's go and be in person with this person. And then if it doesn't work, it doesn't work. But you don't you haven't had a 27-day relationship at this point. You've had a 3-day planning
28 days later
conversation and then a date, and then it's this wasn't for me. And then if the person reaches out to you and is do you want to go on another date? Sure, respond and say no. But for the most part, if it's there was no chemistry there, we're both kind of not feeling it. I don't think there needs to be let me text you all the reasons why this date was inadequate for me.
Yes, totally.
It's just not, it's not for me. And having been on the giving and receiving end of that, it felt really fine for me for the most part. If we've gone on a bunch of dates and you stop responding, that's different. Cause then it's we've spent an intimate amount of time together, but first date, it's I don't know. It's more like a networking session than a impassioned romance, unless it feels like an impassioned romance, in which case go on a second date.
Do you sleep together? Do you not text if you sleep with somebody?
I don't think I slept with anyone on my first date, honestly.
I'm talking about a hypothetical world here, Sam. We're both married, for fuck's sake.
Would I text them after sleeping with them? Probably, yeah. I mean, that feels we've seen each other naked. That's a different level of intimacy than just we had a drink at a bar.
You have to send the sad text that says you're not going to get this anymore.
Yeah, you saw my body and now I'm removing it from the equation.
fall surprisingly in the middle here. Like, I agree with the letter writer's very first statement, which is you don't owe the person an explanation of why you don't want to go out again. Why I say I fall in the middle is because the letter writer's name was Just Let It Fizzle Out. And so I'm not saying don't send the text. Mm-hmm. I'm also saying like it's probably not that, it's not like a cardinal sin to like just let it fizzle out. I have literally let major relationships fizzle out because I'm an asshole. But I think you should fall in the middle. You should send a text, but you don't owe an explanation, right?
Sure.
And if they ask, you can be like, I'm just not feeling it. You know, what comes to mind is recently a friend of mine who is like quite a bit younger, almost a decade or over a decade younger, was just telling me how they got broken up with somebody that they went on like a handful of dates with. Mm-hmm. Now, granted, they, like you said, they'd been on a handful of dates, they had made plans, they had sex, you know, so it was a little bit more involved. Yep. And then they were breaking up or like, you know, being like, I don't think I want to continue this. And apparently this person just like went on and on about all the reasons why they didn't feel like the two people were compatible. They were like, you don't like my music, you know, or like, you're not as into music as I am. And I tend to see myself with this type of person and you're this type of person. And this is all coming from my friend who's like relaying basically the resume that she got from the person dumping her of like everything of what she was looking for that she didn't find in her. Anyway, I just kept thinking when my friend was telling me this, like, this is way too much information. Like, what happened to the simple, like, I don't really feel like we're compatible text, or
yeah, right.
I can't really sustain a relationship with you right now, or I'm not interested in, I don't see a future, you know? Mm-hmm. That being said, I know that can be really scary for a lot of people, but I also think, you know, if I ever find myself to be single again, I'm going to use these opportunities of, you know, the small opportunities that risk a small amount of conflict, right?
Sure. I'm
going to use them as opportunities to practice standing up for myself despite the fear of disappointing people or despite the fear of making somebody uncomfortable. I'm not saying write the text and list the bullet points of all the reasons why you don't like them, but I am saying maybe write the text that's like, hey, I think you're a great person. I had a good time last night, but I don't really see a future with you, or I don't really feel like we're compatible. I think I'm going to go back on the, I don't know. I don't know what. Like, is there an even blander way of saying that, you know?
Yeah. And again, that's just why I'm like, unless the person is like reaching out to you and being like, let's go on a second date, that was amazing. Like, you don't have to preempt this thing, because it's like, if you're both not feeling it, that's great. But you also don't have to like have this like, hey, just so that we're clear, I don't want to go on a second date with you. If the person's like, well, I wasn't really asking. So like, why are you doing this?
That's another great way to put it, is that like, if it's fizzling out because you guys are both texting less and less, or
and you're like not making that another plan, or like you haven't responded after the date, like,
yes,
cool.
Totally.
Like, let it be.
Okay. So somewhere in the middle of all of this, depending on, always. Yes, exactly. Okay. Do you want to dive into today's letter?
Let's do it. All right. This letter comes from KB, whose pronouns are she, they, who is writing from deep within an anxiety spiral. So I, 32, she, they, have been in a poly relationship with H, 30, he, him, for almost a year. I have a lot of fear and insecurity surrounding romantic relationships, and my time with H has been incredibly healing in a lot of ways. Overall, I am a healthier, happier person as a result of this relationship. However, something happened yesterday that made me feel deeply uncomfortable. H messaged the Polycule group chat to tell us that he'd been asked to basically be a sugar baby. One of his friends, A, she, her, older than us, offered to pay him for sex on a regular basis. Our other partner, R, she, her, 24, finds the situation utterly delightful. I do not. If H had sex with A, that's fine with me. But if H had sex with A and then she paid him for it, that is not fine with me. I can't articulate why it makes me so uncomfortable. I support sex work and sex workers, and if H wanted to start doing cam work, even collaborating with other cam workers, I'd be okay with it. I don't understand why in-person sex work is a line for me, but apparently it is. I've told him that it makes me uncomfortable, and he said the offer was, quote, probably mostly a joke. But probably mostly a joke is not the same as it's not going to happen, you know? Fuck, maybe I'm overreacting, but I've pushed my comfort zone a lot in this relationship. And like I said, overall, it has been very positive. So I don't think I would be out of line to ask him not to do in-person sex work because I just can't deal with it. There's a difference between pushing your comfort zone and disrespecting your own feelings. And I feel like that's where this is headed. The reality is that if he wants to pursue in-person sex work, I cannot deal with it and cannot continue to be in a romantic relationship with H. Is there a way to set this boundary without it becoming an ultimatum?
All right, my darling. Thank you so much for writing and for listening and trusting us with this letter. I think that this must be a really complicated, tricky, interpersonal pickle to navigate. It feels like there are lots of, what comes to mind as a poet feels like there's lots of like knots in you, right? That you're trying to figure out like what knots do I need to untangle? What knots do I need to get used to? What knots do I need to hold fast to? Where are my boundaries? Where's my cultural conditioning begin and end? And what do I want in this relationship? We're going to dive into some thoughts about the differences between an ultimatum, a rule, and a boundary, how to talk about those with your partner, and how to sort of, to the best of our abilities, unpack our conditioning around sex work in a puritanical culture, really. But first, we're going to take a very, very quick break.
All right, everyone. Welcome back. KB, thank you again for writing to us. And I also just want to say that I deeply relate to this, you called it I'm on an anxiety spiral, and it's I don't know why this is upsetting me, but all I can think about is how much is upsetting me. And I need to get out of this situation. I need to fix it and put everything back in their place and get the people to do the thing that they need to do to make me feel less anxious. And I have been in that many, many times. I have been in that recently, right? Where it is not a thing that has necessarily gone away from me. So I just want to say that I deeply relate to that. And I deeply relate to that impulse that you're having of gotta fix this, right? I gotta make this thing stop because it's causing me so much anxiety. Deeply relate. And given that, I also want to invite you into some reflection that is kind of rising above the anxiety or moving away from the anxiety, right? And I know that it can be really hard when you're in that moment and it's just your brain is alert, alert, alert. I'm in danger, right? All of that is totally understandable, and reacting out of that is also totally understandable. And hopefully now that it's a while later, we can sort of take a step back and say whew, what was that thing that caused those alarm bells to start going off, right? And part of what I think has been helpful for me in maybe helping me move through those moments of anxiety, perhaps more quickly, or perhaps with a greater understanding of I recognize this is what's happening, and so I need to figure out how to move away from the alarm bells. So part of it is I want you to do some reflection on this. You talked about I don't know why in-person sex work freaks me out, or why this is so anxious or anxiety producing for me. And I want you to think about why that's happening, right? What about the distinction between him having sex on camera with people you don't know? Maybe it's that it is a one-time thing. Maybe it's that it's not some sort of financial situation where he's being kind of taken care of, right? What about this particular instance feels so threatening to you?
Yeah.
And why? Like, what is the story that's coming out of this experience, right? And it may be that you get to a point and you're like, I'm still uncomfortable with it. Like, I still don't want it to happen. And that's really great. That's fine. We can talk about that. But I know that often when I'm having these like anxiety things, it is about something that is totally unrelated to like what is happening in the actual moment. It's like, this is really connected to like something in my past, or this is really connected to something that has happened to me, or this is connected to some sort of like social conditioning that I've had about like how relationships should work.
Right.
And so I want you to dig into that a little bit. Now that hopefully you've found a place where you can sort of look at it with a little bit more of a distance, because I think that that's probably where some of this healing is going to come. And I'm not saying you have to make a different decision about like what your relationship is going to look like, but I am saying that I want you to do it in a way that feels more authentic to who you are and what your relationship is, rather than just like a response to our brain chemistry freaking out on us about something.
Yeah, and I think, Sam's right. We're not even in this letter going to say what the right answer is for you, because only you and your partners know that, right?
Right. Yep.
Only you can establish what your boundaries are within your heart and your relationships and whatnot. But we can help maybe hold your hand through some of those deeper reflections, as Sam said. One of the things that comes to mind immediately about what Sam was just posing was, well, there's a line that's blurred when you go from the performance of an online cam experience, to sex with a live person for money. Like I'm only saying this out loud to be like, is this what's bothering you? Or is this the nerve that was struck? Does it feel like it's too similar looking to the sex that they have with you? That isn't paid, that isn't a service, that isn't profitable. Does that make you question its integrity or its sincerity? These are the things about sex work that we have that have been sort of like ingrained in us societally, that make it hard for us to hold the nuance and hard for us to hold the whole complexity of sexuality and human experience, that like, that a sex worker can have passionate, loving sex with their partner and turn around and have passionate, loving sex with a client. And that those two acts look the same and are inherently different.
For sure.
Only to the sex worker, to the client, to the sex worker's partners, like it is as different as it in their hearts, right? Like, I don't know what, maybe it's the exact same thing for them. Maybe it's totally different. And I'm wondering if it makes you feel like this, the sanctity of your intimacy is threatened if it could be repeated in a way that is profitable. And I think that's, that is the number one way we can get through feelings, is to allow them and to welcome them and then process through them. Right. So like, I'm not saying that is a bad instinct to have, but I would say, well, why does that make you feel like your intimacy is less genuine? What does it threaten there? Why are you feeling really activated by the idea of this?
Yeah. Yeah, I think it also, it might have something to do with like societal conceptions of sex work as well. Like, I feel like there's been like a really growing acceptance of sex work as related to people who do OnlyFans or put stuff on Twitter or whatever it might be, as sort of like, yeah, absolutely, I'm pro sex work because I want people to get their money. But then the actual idea of sort of in-person sex work, where somebody is like paying somebody to have sex with them, right? Like, not a porn performance, not like for a spectator, but like for the actual act of having sex. I don't think it's been as like broadly sort of socialized as sort of like cam work or like work that like looks adjacent to porn.
Right.
So I'm wondering if that's like part of it too, right? Where it's like some of the societal conditioning about like, people who have sex for money and like our societal beliefs about them, right? That they're bad people, that they're dirty, whatever it might be, which to be clear is not absolutely not true, right? Like sex work is work. And if everything is consensual and works out in the way that it should, like it's really great. So, maybe part of it is that like societal piece, like Sierra said, maybe it's part about like the relationship and like the two different sex acts and what they mean. It might also be about like the idea of not being able to take care of H in the way that this person could, like financially, right? Like this sugar baby situation where it's like, oh, he's going to get access to yeah, absolutely. Where it's like, well, if this person is providing him with financial resources as well as access to sex, like what can I bring, right? Like I can, you know, I'm trying to support myself or whatever it might look like, where it's like, that might be part of it as well. And the thing is that Sierra and I can speculate about this stuff, right?
Yes.
And we're not in your body. We're not in your heart. So we don't know like what is the thing that's sort of triggering these alarms to go off.
Yeah.
And I want to say that like, if you get to a point where you're like, no, this is still a line in the sand for me, then like you can absolutely make that clear in your relationship. And I like your question about like, how do I set a boundary without setting an ultimatum? And I'm like, this is an ultimatum. Like this is like the definition of an ultimatum, where it's like if you do this thing, you will not be in a relationship with me, right? Like that is an ultimatum. Ultimatums aren't necessarily bad in relationships, right? I have ultimatums in my relationship. If Peter does something that hurts me in a particular way, our relationship will be over. Like that'll like we've set the limits of what's okay and not okay in our relationships and been really clear about what's going to happen if some of those lines get crossed. So ultimatums are okay. Like we think about them as like being bad, but what they really are just like they're agreed upon rules of our relationship, right? Like they're the ways that we decide what is in and out of bounds of how we're supposed to operate. And if there are no repercussions for stepping outside of those bounds, then the rules are meaningless, right?
Yes.
Like then they don't actually have any weight in our relationship.
I saw something on Instagram recently on this account I follow. It's Raquel Martin, PhD, and Dr. Martin is talks a lot about mental health and social justice and psychology. And she posted a video recently sort of explaining the difference between a rule and a boundary. And I felt like it was really helpful. She used the example, if I'm remembering correctly, of like, you know, if you tell somebody, don't email me before 9 a.m., that's a rule because they can email you whenever they want, but you're telling them, don't email me before 9 a.m. If you respond to that email before 9 a.m., that's breaking your own boundary. Do you know what I mean? Like there's a different, the rule, the ultimatum to your partner is, I don't feel comfortable with this. The boundary is, if you do this, I am going to respond in this way. The boundary is, I am responsible for my feelings. I am responsible for caretaking and providing for myself as a protector. I'm going to protect myself and take care of myself in these ways. If you act accordingly, right? The rule is, in our partnership, we don't participate in sex work. In these ways, whatever. The boundary is going to be up to you and how you take care of your emotional and physical needs.
Absolutely. Absolutely. And these types of rules require consent from both parties to be part of, right? So like if you, and what's scary about that is that means that your boyfriend could say, I don't want to follow that rule, right? Like,
yes.
And I think sometimes we get into this idea of like, if I set up the right rules, then I can like make people do the things that I want them to do, right? Like the idea of like, don't email me before 9. Guess what, friend? People are going to email you before 9. Like that's going to happen.
Yes.
Or the person has to agree and say like, yes, okay, I understand and I won't do that. But that doesn't actually mean that we can like force people to do the thing that we want to, right?
Right.
If you set up this rule where you say, hey, if you do sex work, then we can't be in a relationship together, then then he has to consent to that. And that can be really scary because like, who knows what he's going to decide to do? Who knows if he's going to say like, actually, I want to do this more than I want to be in relationship with you. Or I think this is deeply unfair. And the fact that you would impose it on me feels like not a great sign for our relationship. All of that stuff could happen. But that doesn't mean that we're necessarily doing something wrong. Like if this is absolutely important to you, it's important for both of you to know that so that you can decide whether or not you are going to be in relationship with each other. But there's always the risk that this person is going to say like, that rule doesn't work for me. And that is his prerogative, right? Like he gets to decide whether or not he wants to agree to the rule that you're proposing for your relationship.
Yes. And I also want to say it is 100% reasonable. And I think people within the sex work world would agree that there can be a buffet of boundaries and rules for your relationship, right?
For sure.
There are, just like Sam said, he has a multitude of different rules and boundaries for his relationship that are different than his past relationships, right?
For sure.
And that, making up an example, like, for example, let's pretend that in my relationship, it's absolutely okay for Willow to kiss other people, but she can't have sex with them. That is something, this is an example.
That's a great one.
Right? Uh-huh. Well, I don't know.
No, it's just a great one because that's also like part of Peter and Maya's agreement around like what's okay and what's not okay. Yeah.
Cute. I was just channeling Mr. Blackwell.
That's right.
Yeah, but like meaning you don't have to be, and you know this from your first year in this non-monogamous polycule, like that you don't have to be boundaryless or ruleless. In fact, I know that polyamorous and non-monogamous partnerships require a ton of rules and negotiation and communication and boundaries, right? And so if at the end of all of this soul searching that you do about like why this was so activating for you, which by the way, very relatable, would be activating for me too.
For sure.
If at the end of all of this soul searching, you discover, I still don't want you to have sex with other people for money, I'd be comfortable with something like camming. That is it. I mean, you can negotiate that with them like that. What I'm trying to say is it doesn't have to be like one big wall or no walls,
Yeah, absolutely. Yes. There's an in between here that you two can figure out together.
Yes. To our letter writer, you're doing the right things, even asking yourself, why am I reacting in this way?
For sure. Absolutely. All right, KB, thank you so much for writing to us. We hope that this musing, that some of this advice will be helpful in helping alleviate some of your anxiety around this. And, Sierra and I have faith that you will be able to figure this out with your partner, whether or not that means that sex work is on the table or not. And that no matter what the outcome is, you are going to make the decision that is right for you and in terms of what you are and are not okay with when it comes to your relationship.
All right, my darling, we love you so much and we hope this helps.
Thank you so much for writing. We love you. All right, everyone. Thank you so much for listening. If you would like more content from us, or if you would like to access all of our episodes without ads, you can always support us on Patreon. If you support us on Patreon for as little as $5 a month, you'll get an additional bonus weekly episode, as well as access to every single one of our episodes without ads. That's patreon.com/justbreakuppod.
You can slide into our DMs, send us your favorite relationship meme, but most importantly, you can submit your questions about all matters of the heart at justbreakuppod.com, which is also where you can find our merchandise.
Please remember to like, follow, subscribe, give us a 5-star rating and review. This literally keeps our mics on and helps us reach more brokenhearted souls who need two random strangers giving them relationship advice.
Just Break Up is a production of Duvid Media, original music, recording, editing, producing, all magical things by our good friend Spencer Worth Davis. Make sure to check out his podcast and his music. And remember, our boundaries don't have to look like all or nothing. Oftentimes, they are conversations, they are negotiations, they can be malleable, and they can be supported by things like rules. Ultimately, boundaries are gifts that we give to ourselves. And if all else fails,
just break up.